Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Marija, welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm so thankful for the introduction that Jocelyn made for the two of us to actually get together and have this conversation. How are you today?
Thank you. I am great and really happy to have met you and to have this opportunity to have a conversation with you about things
Yeah.
that matter to both of us.
And it will. Yeah. I'm excited as well. I like to let my guests just introduce themselves, start your story where you'd like, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. So, my name is Marija Parente. I'm actually a mom of two boys. I have two boys that are 7 and 10. I've been married, it'll be almost 12 years. I consider myself a New Yorker, even though I'm originally from Montenegro. So, I have a perspective of being outside of the country, I guess, culturally different. And I work as a total access coach. I consider myself an artist, but also a coach. And the total access is the name that actually I made up to summarize or to express in a very concise way what it is that I do. Even though you can't really put it in just two words, but that's what it is that I do. Total access coaching.
Okay, we'll dive into that. Unpack what total access coaching is, because now I'm intrigued. Just the
Mm.
name alone. Well, we talked a little bit before about the play on words in the English language and how words are really made up, but we have our own meanings to what they are. Like we learn definitions of words when we're young and as we grow, but in reality, if we choose, we can pick a word and define it ourselves for our own definition. So unpack total access and how it relates to coaching, because now, like I said, I'm intrigued.
Perfect. So total access, it really is totally accessing you, like who you are, who I think people really are, giving them total access, meaning accessing who we are from the perspective of a larger system. And that involves, for people who might be already trained in your audience and may know about these methods, it comes from a family constellation work or systemic constellation work. So it's looking at a larger system and how we fit into that system, or said more precisely, how we belong in that system. Comes from the premise that everybody belongs. So when I say total access, I really work with people to see their system, whether it's their culture, family, ancestry, education, cultural background, whatever, and seeing what they're coded for. Because when we were born, we're not a clean slate. You're either the first child, second child, first boy, or another gender fluid, who knows, right? So there are all these codings that obstruct who we can create ourselves as in life. So that's one part of total access. And the other part is looking at, okay, now we're born, and around toddler's age, we start having a perception of life, what life really is. Things happen, we're dealing with reality. And the first time we don't like reality or what's happening, we begin to make up, oh, life is this way, or this person is like that, and that's from the perspective of a 2-year-old. And then, as children, we continue to add meanings to experiences that we have in life. And by the time we're 20, we have defined our life entirely, so much so that from that point on, we're kind of replaying the same pattern. So total access, the way the reason I use this word, and I actually worked with someone to help me define my work, is because I got to see that my work is really about unpacking all these obstacles to that authentic self or true self, soul essence. There are many different names we can call it, but that part of who we are that nobody can take away from us. Meaning, if you go alone and you're meditating on a mountain and the words disappear and the thoughts disappears, and you're observing your feelings, and you're just being, that's who you are, and no matter what happens, you can come back to it. And I found it that when people experience that and understand what it is and how to access it, life becomes creation rather than replaying old patterns, whether they come from from systems, from the background, and from something that didn't really start with them, or from something that did happen in their lives and then misinterpret it in a way that now obstructs what they think is possible.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. So, if I hear you correctly, then when we're young, our experiences are mapped onto us. In your work, are you able to help those overcome, I would say, negative coding? Is that correct to use it that way? Negative coding that may have happened in the younger years, to peel back those layers to find their authentic self on the inside, to come back to who they are. So that is possible, yes?
Yes, and it's not just negative coding. I mean, negative is a matter of interpretation. It just is. It's the coding. Now, we get to see whether the coding we have is something that we consider a gift and we want to pass on further, or if it's feeling like a burden to us. Like my grandfather was a cardiologist, and my father was expected to go to medical school, and then my uncle, and when that didn't happen, then I was the next one expected to go to medical school. That could be a gift, but to me it wasn't. It felt like a burden because I wanted to help people in some way, but I'm super sensitive, and seeing blood and seeing sickness, like really as a strong empath, that just really wasn't my calling. And so I wanted to help people, and that sounded good until I grappled with what doctors really do and realized, well, that's not something that I would like. So that was a burden that felt imposed on me, or that I felt I was expected to do, just because I was good in school and I had straight A's, and they felt like, oh, she can be a doctor. There was no regard for what Maria really wanted, for what I had as gift, that I wanted to nurture and bring into this world further.
Y Yeah, how much as parents do we put those expectations on our children that we think they
Mhm.
should be X, Y, or Z, and they don't actually follow that path, or sometimes they do. I mean, that was my case. I came from a family of educators, so they just expected us to go out and be teachers, you know? "Well, that's what you're
Yeah.
going to do. That's what your father did. That's just what you do." And how often we go into that and then we wind up not operating in what feels true. Like I went in and I taught, I like helping people, but teaching wasn't the method or the
Yeah.
mode that resonated the best with me in the environment that I had been given. How did you find your path? And it sounds like you were expected to become a cardiologist. Talk a little bit about, obviously you're not a cardiologist today.
No, I'm not a cardiologist. And to be true to what they expected, it was just to be a doctor. It could have been any kind of doctor. And as a matter of fact, I was a pre-med student for about a year and a half. I was in New York, as a Montenegrin who came as an exchange student and then started college. And a year and a half, I think, into pre-med and taking biologies and chemistries and all that I thought I needed to go to medical school, I realized I'm bartending several days a week to pay for school. And I remember chatting with somebody who became my close friends about school in general. And she was sharing that she was studying film, and I couldn't even, like, I was just listening to her, and I wasn't sure if it was jealousy. Like, I could misinterpret it as jealousy at the time, but I was just so fascinated and inspired. And it really comes to that. You know how people say when they share who they are, and when they share what they do freely, that it inspires other people to be. It really was like that. Like, she was so free, and she could choose to study film, and suddenly I thought to myself, why don't I? Like, why did I how did I get to this place where I'm doing something I really don't want to do? And so I really examined that. And I remember coming back home and then telling my mom, who was more supportive of that. Of course, she told me everything that she doesn't, that she thinks wouldn't work around that, and what I need to watch for. And then I came back to Montenegro and shared with my grandmother, who told me, please don't tell your grandfather because he'll have a heart attack if you do. And I found myself like really struggling. Oh my God, like how can I have that impact? How can my happiness and me expressing my desire in the world be like cause somebody to die? Now, thankfully, I am a rebel of sorts. And so I did it anyway. I mean, I probably wouldn't be that unkind right now. I would say that in a nicer way. But it really, how I got to see my passions, which is what was your question, or how I got to uncover that, was actually by just being and walking paths and then examining whether I felt good or it didn't feel good and why not, and peeling off the layers of what didn't bring me joy or contentment and peace, and grappling and being brave to try on things that did, even in what I call like in a face of no agreement, meaning with nobody supporting it and nobody saying yes to that. I felt if I don't, it will die with me. It won't exist ever. So, you know, that's how
Yeah,
it started.
it takes a lot of courage to go back and say to, your family, and, let's face it, our families have influence over us. We'd like to think they don't. We'd like to think we're independent, but in reality, a lot of what we do is shaped by how our families treat us, how, they react to us. Now,
It's not exactly, and Sue, it's not up to parents at all, actually. I mean, it might be, right? In some cases, I don't know what's happening in people's households. Maybe some parents are more aggressive. I think you're right. In a world that we live in right now, maybe we're a little bit softer and listening to our children more. But in family constellation work, which I'm trained to facilitate, and that's part of total access, what I use family constellation as a lens because of that premise that as children we're loyal to our family lines, not always to mom and dad, but sometimes to grandmother or grandfather. So in family constellation work, what I've discovered greatly was that things get carried from one generation to another, and it's not, I don't actually even know why this works, honestly. Like, that's actually a hard thing to say, and I think, as a coach, people probably expect that I know it, and I don't actually. The way I work is by inquiring with clients and uncovering their system and seeing what's there. There's no dogma, there's no truth. We look every individual separately. But in most cases, what I found is that we are paying loyalties. If mom was unhappy, it's almost like we don't feel good being happy ourselves. So on some subconscious level, we're putting a lid on what we can achieve. Sometimes there are bad things that happen and we're going complete opposite. But if you're doing something opposite of something else, then you're still sort of walking in the same direction, because this or not this, it's still all about this. It's not empty space on which you can create anything. So whether you're trying to change something that happened or you're trying to ignore that it happened, that thing not resolved, not untangled, still has an impact. And I think those expectations are not even expectations of parents, is what we subconsciously pick up from the environment. So, the importance of that, I mean, when I talked about total access, the importance of looking at our system and taking this lens is because our original system, the system we were born into, whether you're the oldest one or the middle one or the youngest one or anything like that, we actually end up replicating the system. Like, we begin to be the oldest child at our job, the oldest child in a relationship. Like, if people who sort of like, I'll give you an example because otherwise it's all theoretical, right? So in some cases, for example, if the father died young, Sometimes a child, if it's the oldest boy, he steps up to be a partner to his mom energetically, not physically, but energetically, right? He feels obligated. And so that starts being replicated. So that person almost never can really um, feel that they're getting support because they feel they have to step up into the place that actually isn't their rightful place. That person is still a child, even if his father is gone. So in this work, we get to see that they belong here, even with a missing dad. They're still here. They're not partners, they're a child. So that's a kind of disorder that gets replicated, and it's important to see it because when you see it, when you have awareness, you can bring awareness to that. And when you don't like what kind of situations you find yourself in your life, you get that that's where it comes from, and then you have power to change it, rather than just thinking it's happening to you and you have zero power to change it in any way.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Is there any other aspect of our ancestry that could affect us in who we are today?
Yes, I mean it's I mean it's actually even complicated to talk about it, right? Like even when I have workshops with groups in it and we do an example of family constellation. I mean the work works like this. You actually set up a system and I facilitate and ask questions and we examine together. So it's not like me giving something or forcing an outcome or trying to get a particular answer. It's more about inquiring and understanding. The whole premise of it is, the way I see it is, if we, our original system, let's say mom and dad and however our family looked like. In my case, my mom raised me, dad missing, mom raised me. And then my mom was also very young. So my grandmother helped raise me as well. So that made it confusing a bit of like, who's the mother here? Is my mom a sister or a mom or both? And I'm very close to my mom. And sometimes I treat her subconsciously almost as a sister. It can feel disrespectful. But for example, my mom would say things like, this other person treats their parents with a lot more respect. And it took me years to understand that that is because there's a bigger difference in age between that person and their parents. Whereas between me and my mom is very small difference. I have clients that are older than my mom. So there are times when I kind of break that line and I stop being a child and I try to kind of be on my mom's level. And it always creates conflict. So it's really important to examine it and to see what you uncover. Everybody's life and what I call fabric of existence is quite different. But I mean, since you asked, like, what are the kind of things that can happen? For example, in a case of war and murders and um, people dying young or huge losses of money or um, like bad events like that. If you think about collective consciousness, that is seeking truth. Like the consciousness itself is seeking truth. So sometimes people would wake up and feel ill, or they will feel strongly about something and not understand where it comes from. One way of looking at it, even though it's a little bit woo woo, but one way of looking at it is maybe the system is trying to reconcile something through a person. People are innocent. A bigger system is stronger than one individual. So it's really important, if you are creating your life, if you want to create a beautiful life, it's important to have regard for what wants to happen through you, because if that's not in alignment and if that's not something you want to do, you want to disentangle from that, be conscious of it so that you can create something new. I'll give you a simple example that I think happens so often. People work in an organization that they hate, and then they complain about the organization, but that's where they work and get money from and like that. So that's an issue, right? Like you have to be in agreement with something about the organization or find some kind of alignment. Otherwise it's probably damaging for you and you should probably quit and then go and do that someplace else. And often people who find jobs like that have something like that in their original system. So it's, I mean, I can talk, you know, for hours about that, right? Like every example is so different, but that inner image we have of our original system gets replicated. And when we see something more about who we are or what came before us, we're richer and we can create a richer life. So, yes, I didn't become a doctor, for example. I'm not a cardiologist, but I helped heal a lot of people's broken hearts through books, coaching, etc. And that I can do, that I can work on. My grandfather also written books. He's written about medicine and Shakespeare and combined fields that people didn't combine before, like literature and medicine and similar things. I do something similar. Like I took this awareness process and ego dismantling process and family constellation and transformational coaching and created this new cocktail that only I really do. Only I do this particular cocktail. You can find facilitators of one or the another, but you don't really find anyone that combines it in this unique way. So I turn that burden into a gift. That's an example of it.
Mm. Wow. Okay, so okay, I'm just trying to process all of
I
that.
know
That's
it's a
amazing.
lot. It's a
That's
lot.
amazing.
It's
Yeah,
really a lot.
it
Yeah.
is a well, no, it is a lot, but it's beautiful at the same time. There's a lot of it, but there's beauty there because what you do is so unique, and I think that's why I'm having a tough time formulating a question off of that because you've done so much and you've put all of these components that you've studied together into this total access that that you have. What are some ideal clients? Like, how would somebody know that they would benefit from working with you versus, say, somebody else?
For me, the reason I even do what I do is because I needed somebody who could hold space for sort of all my gifts, or at the very least, not tame a part of me that was a true part of me while they were coaching me on something else. So even if I was doing, for example, singing coaching, yeah, she didn't have to understand my relationships, but at the very least, she didn't diminish that relationships matter to me, if that makes sense. So, some of my favorite coaches, and I had many of them, one of my constellation teacher, for example, is one of my favorite mentors. And the reason for that is that even though she doesn't do everything that I do, she had that understanding. She's an artist. She's also a writer, author, teacher, speak. So she has all these identities that I identify with. Number one, and number two, she was able to hold space again because she does this work, systemic work, and has a larger view, so to speak. She was always able to hold larger space for me and not try to squeeze me into something that she already knows. So more a space of inquiry rather than a space of knowing. Many coach, I mean, some of the coaching out there is about knowing or about this is the formula. And while there are certain spaces that I think people have to go through to uncover who they are, and I've created a method for that. So it's not just sit on a call and see what happens. It's not like that at all. It's very actually organized and method. There's a method to it. At the same time, because I have this larger view, I think I give people more space to just be human and be complicated and be messy in their humanity, because I think we all are. So that's one of the biggest differences, that I see even coaching as artistry, as an act of creation. And I can't say what is there for you to create. I think that's an audacious and arrogant statement. So and I think we spoke about it earlier. As a coach, it's almost like I enter your system and your world. And because I don't carry the same burdens that you carry, that you might carry from all the restrictions you had, I see with open eyes. And then I share what I see, and we work together on seeing what's blocking you so that you can step into your full self and create more open space, more possibilities, etc. So that's like one major difference. The other difference is really that my work is very specific to unleashing that which is truly you. Because I think in a world that we live in, a lot of people are arguing or have conflicts because of what they identify with. If you are a member of this religion and this and the other religion, there's almost always a conflict because it's about who sees what's true, and what's true is a point of view of these two very different people. So they can both be right, but in a conversation, often there's a conflict. So I find it so important to tap into who we really are, because that goes beyond this duality that is a state of our material world that we live inside of. And I think that for anyone to create anything, they need to know that first. And then from that point on, if they want a great performance coach, I probably wouldn't recommend Tony Robbins. I would recommend Jocelyn because that's what Jocelyn can do really well. I do the specific discovery, inquiry, and that is the inquiry on who you really are and why are you really here, and then from there replugging you back into your life and having courage to follow that, because I think magic happens when we do. That's my own example.
Right, right, because we can't really create from a space of either scarcity or anxiety. It's very difficult to see our horizon that way. I'm curious about what's your average time that you work with somebody for them to say, like, when they start with you to peeling back all those layers and getting to the place where they can be comfortable with who their authentic self is.
Oh, that's a great question. um, I have people that I've coached for 10 years. Actually, I think the my oldest client has been with me for over 10 years, and as a matter of fact, she has accomplished all her 10-year goals, because when we started working, we created a 6-month plan, a year plan, 2-year plan, 5-year plan, and a 10-year plan. And she's accomplishing her 10 years, and we're about to create a new one. So that's a example of somebody who's on one end of the spectrum. And I have people who just have one-off sessions. My friend actually shared recently on one of my YouTube videos. She had a family constellation session with me, or one-on-one session, total access, I call it. And then I use whatever tools are necessary. But we did that session, and it was so amazing that for a month she's been having a great experience from having done it. So the truth is, people can work, at different pace, and depending on what works for them, their schedule, their budget, etc. What I find for people who do the entire enchilada, as I call it, the whole total access work with me, and really discover themselves and their mission here and all that, it takes about, oh, I hate saying this because I know it can be discouraging to some people, but I'll tell the truth. It takes about a year to 2 years. Like after a year, you really get it. And then you can access yourself much faster. But by the time 2 years run around, like I think that's about the space where people begin to kind of really know it and live from there, and it's like they're reliable to carry it on. So that's, it's not easy. But the reason it's not easy is not because there's something wrong with them or even with my method. The reason it's quite hard is because the world doesn't operate inside of this knowledge. So we are pioneers, we are on a cutting edge of this type of work. It exists out there in different formats, but it's also still pretty young, and not what you see on social media, not what you see on news, and not where you see most people coming from. So there's a lot of undoing, like where people understand that, and that they have experience or they have circumstances in their life, and then they come back to me and they go, but what about this? But what about this? and like that. So it takes like a few breakdowns like that and dismantling those to begin to build that muscle where you can just do it all on your own. So that's roughly the time. And I think that will decrease the more people do the work and the more I am able to create this movement of people being naturally expressed and free to be creative and express in the world.
Yeah, because isn't the purpose of coaching to try and help people to no longer need a coach? I hate to put it that way, but the success of the coach is based on the fact that that person doesn't really need them anymore, or they move on to a different type of, coaching. Although I guess that's really not a fair thing to say because I've talked to people who have had coaches over a 20-year period and they change and there's some people I know have 6 coaches.
Yeah.
So it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, it's not. If you're doing Yeah, I mean, coaching, and this is what we discussed before. Coaching is just a way of approaching something. Coaching means to help somebody accomplish something. So if I'm helping people live a life of awareness and growth and expansion, then sky's the limit as to how much or how little they can work with me. It's up to them. So it never really ends. Until we die, it doesn't end because we don't stop expanding. Now, there are certain things that if somebody wants to hit a certain goal or sell a company, grow a company to, I don't know, $10 million and then sell it off, and then they accomplish that and then they stop having a performance coach, that's fine. Or if somebody hits a health goal, then you can stop. But coach is really a partner in transformation. And there are many, again, there are coaches for many different things. I think more and more I notice that in companies, even people that know something or have a level of mastery in something, they're getting training, coaching training, so that they can learn how they can take what they know and what they mastered and pass it on or teach somebody in the same methodology. I think that's probably a future for me. Um, Giving or training people inside of my method. For right now, it's really just me. People, nobody's trained inside of a total access, and uh, I'm not that well known, or I don't have that capacity right now. But that's hopefully the future, because otherwise the whole wisdom will die with me, unfortunately. And unless people read my books or coach with me, that's it. What I can offer them will disappear with me.
Yeah, well, I guess all of us in some capacity need to figure out like what we do and if we can scale it in some way. But you know what? I would actually disagree with you ever so slightly that if you die and you don't teach anybody, it dies with you. I'm just going to offer you a different perspective. All
Mhm.
those people that you have coached in some capacity have learned what you taught them.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
all walk away with something. They walk away with bits and pieces of your methodology. And I think one of the beautiful things of coaching, and this has come out of my own experience with my coach, because we've talked about this. And I asked him, why do you coach? What's the drive? And I'll ask you this in a minute. But for him, his drive was that, he realizes that he not only changes my destiny, my future, but that I go out and because I'm changed, I go and I change other people around me, whoever I come in contact with,
Yeah.
so that one person
Oh,
actually, it's like fractal effect.
yeah. I mean, it's a ripple effect, and that's true. Like I'm happy you disagree with me, right? Like we can disagree and still.
Now, I
Even,
don't mean it in a wrong disagree. I
no,
wanna
no, no.
compliment
But
you and
even,
encourage you that, it
yeah,
really is. I know what you mean. You want to make it so that it's replicatable and that somebody else can be able to do what you do from a scalability perspective, and anybody who wants to grow their business, yeah, that's what they want to do, but
yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe it dies with you because everybody that you coach takes a piece of you and it takes a piece of their knowledge with you. I think that was the
Absolutely.
point.
Absolutely. And you're right in that I mean, you're right that everybody is already impacted, and that's more of an impact what you're talking about. I'm just speaking about technology that I've developed derived from things that already exist. And one of the biggest reasons I'm actually writing that, and I have a manuscript and have several ebooks, is because I want to capture that unique perspective. Not so that people can replicate me or try to do what I did, but more because if I don't share that perspective, it won't know who can share it. If I don't express it in some way. This is why I'm a big stand for expression. If we don't say what's there, if we don't express what's important to us, it just won't exist. Like if we're not attending to it. So it doesn't come from a scarcity point of view of, or even from self-importance. It just comes from that I came to this world and a lot of things had to go right in order for me to be here, and even in order for me to be where I'm at today. A lot of contribution, a lot of people supported me and contributed to me, and I have this authentic desire to express my view of the world through art, through books, through teaching, etc. And so that's, I mean, I think that's what you said you were gonna ask, what drives me. That's what drives me, like really an impulse of creation, like the expansion, because even when I share it, I am present to something new. It's almost like I declutter something and let it go into the universe so it can live on its own. And then I create more space to learn something new and grow even more. So, not from a perspective of attachment, but from the perspective of being in a flow of life and continually giving back, not even giving back, but giving forward more likely what I've gotten, and then receiving more and being a conduit of what's possible.
Mm, mhm. What's one of your biggest joys of coaching?
Gosh, I love when people get who they are. I love when I notice that people, first of all, when they get that sense of like, you know, when they have so much anxiety. And I think you mentioned anxiety earlier. Anxiety is just a fear of something that hasn't happened yet. It hasn't even happened, but people are suspended in a, and then when they get to see it and they recognize, and their inner wisdom just comes through. It's just, I'm in awe of people. I'm just in awe of what's possible, because I help them remove the obstacles. I see the obstacles. I mind for what's in a way. I don't know what's underneath it. I just know something is, or I come from premise that something is. So we tap, 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 and clear, and magic. It just really gets me every time. It moves me to pieces when you see the limitlessness of who people are underneath the complaints and all the things.
Yeah, when you remove all those blockages and you really go down deep to who the person really is, it's gotta be a sense of satisfaction. I can see it in your face as you're
It's just,
talking
yeah,
about it.
it's really so, it's priceless, because when people get who they are, I get to be who I am, and it's this mirroring. It's magical. It's magical.
I was gonna ask you about words. So, what does the word abracadabra mean to you?
Well, with word I create, and I love that word actually. Jocelyn uses it a lot, but I've read it in different places as well. I truly believe that words create, and we often use words to describe, to say, well, this is how it is. And the moment we do that, we limit what's possible. So language has this ability to be what I call like ego or reaction language, where you are dwelling into all that doesn't work or how you see it, or limited points of view or descriptions, and locking things into our perception. This is how it is. Like, this is how it is, right? Which is language. That, I think, limits. But language also has this beautiful quality to create. When you say, I declare X, or when you say yes when you get married, or when you make a promise, I promise you, like that. So that's a creative part of language. Like with word, I create, and underneath all these obstacles, whether it's systemic from family lines or from things that happen to us, there's just space. And while that space feels like pregnant with some impulse of creativity, it's still language that allows us to communicate and create and build something that hasn't existed before. So even total access, it's created. It's two words we know. I put them together and created what total access is. And now I get to share that. So it's a very, very powerful tool. Language and abracadabra with word we create because we made up language.
Yeah, yeah, true, true. What's your perspective on conversations that maybe you might have had with clients? I'm going out on a line. I'm going to assume something here for a minute.
Mhm.
Conversations where people will say something and they think they're creating with their words, but they're really not. I'll give you an example. I would think common would be they're not a millionaire and they say, "Well, I'm a millionaire," or they say something that's not true yet. What do you do in that situation? Since they're using that words, it's not true yet.
Well, it really depends. When somebody says I'm a millionaire and I don't get inspired by that, that's the first thing to look at. I don't believe you. So I use, because I've done work to get to my essence and I know kind of my pitfalls, if you will, like um, the way I avoid dealing with responsibility, etc. Like I know myself to well, let me put it that way. Um, I use myself as resonance, and I think we're wired for resonance. So when somebody speaks something and it's authentic, we feel it, and I think that's more biology and neuroscience, etc. But that's my experience. So let me just speak from my experience. So I use that as a resonance. Now, I would never tell people, oh, that doesn't inspire me. Rather, I would notice that it didn't inspire me. And I would ask something like, well, does that inspire you? And then that's opportunity for them to say, well, I don't know. And if it doesn't, then we look at why it doesn't. And then they would probably say something that could be what's limiting their ability to see that that's possible. Because if they think it's possible and they believe it and they're inspired by it, there's nothing wrong with them saying that, even if they have zero money in their bank account. Only time I will examine that is when they say that and they're not inspired, they're forcing something, they're trying to be something they're not, and I use myself to determine that. Of course, asking questions, being didactical, not assuming anything.
Mhm, mhm. I love your answer, and I'm glad I asked the question because you touched on the authenticity piece of what somebody's saying. That's the first component. The second thing I picked up on is if it resonates with you or resonates with them, and there's an energy that people put off themselves, sometimes maybe
Mm.
not even realizing it. And if the aura that surrounds them or how they speak those phrases, those words, whatever they say, if their aura or their countenance doesn't match what they're saying, then there's that disconnect there.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought up that you don't directly say something to them, but instead you use a series of questions and you dig a little deeper. And a good coach will do that. A good coach will
Yeah.
ask the questions. A good friend will do that. Coach, friend, doesn't matter. A
Yeah.
good friend, a good coach is somebody, instead of them telling you what to do, if that's not what you're looking for, right? Sometimes you have to be told what to do, but if you're not
Exactly.
looking to be told what to do, that person speaking to you is most useful to you through a series of questions to actually figure out what it is that you're trying to say or feel or uncover.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's the other piece that I should include just for the full answer. if I don't believe for myself that something like that is possible, or if I have something that I haven't reconciled around money or creating a lot of money, and if I can't get out of the way, so to speak, then that might be what's not having the resonance. We have that often. I mean, I've seen people that are like super happy and creating something really amazing. And if I was in a bad space in my life for whatever reason, there will be this discord as well, like dissonance in that space as well. But that didn't have to do with them or with them, it had to do with me. So as a coach, I think one of the most important things that we have to um, really find a way to train ourselves in is our own personal integrity. I may not be able to make $1 million, that's okay, but with word I create. So if I say something is important to me, I need to be working towards it and putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, so that I understand what it means to create in the world. Because if I know the principles of creativity and what it takes to create in the areas that are important to me, I have no problem listening to somebody creating money or something else that maybe I don't want to create. In this case, it's not true. Like I would love to create money as well. But that's what I think makes us a good coach. And given what you do and what you're creating, I think it's useful to share it in this conversation that to be a great coach, because you're not a teacher, you're not passing on the knowledge, you are inquiring in something. You also have to be somebody who's willing to be coached and who's willing to learn. And the moment we stop growing and expanding and learning, that can get in the way of us being great coaches. So for me, um, what gives me, what I feel gives me permission, how I give myself permission to do what I do and to coach and to tell people that I can, is the fact that I'm creating and expanding and willing to look at things differently.
Mm, mhm. What you were saying just kind of flows into the question that I had for you. I want you to talk about your definition of coaching.
So, I mean, simple definition of coach is just somebody who helps people uncover blind spots and then helps them achieve whatever they say they're achieving. My goal is total access, accessing you that is limitless. Let me say it that way. So that's the goal. Um, so uncovering blind spots or what you will, I mean, you can expand on that definition, but it's helping people achieve something faster, more efficiently, better. Now, again, as I said, coaching is a really generic term. It's like saying a teacher of what, right? Like, so that's where we have to kind of look at.
What kind of mind shift does a client have to go through in order for them to be a really good receptor to what a coach is going to do for them?
Yeah. So I don't know, generally, in my experience with my clients, is what I listen for is, are they committed? Because when I have an experience that I'm trying to sell somebody something or convince them, and it feels like I'm talking too much about the same thing and it feels like I'm repeating myself, I begin to get, okay, I am the one generating this conversation and doing more of the work. And what I'm listening for is, does the other person want what I have to offer? Are they committed? Is there something in what they hear in me speaking or in who I'm being that they want for themselves? And if so, am I the best person for that? So I really haven't cracked the code for like what works for everybody. As a matter of fact, um, in parts, I can't say I'm struggling because I'm turning the struggle around and really being an inquiry of how social media works. One thing I'm beginning to get is, wow, like I'm actually not listening because I don't know how to listen on social media. Who do you listen? Where does listening happen? Is it in likes or comments or DM messages personally to me from what I posted. So I feel almost like I'm a TV, I'm projecting and not getting feedback. So, some people are masterful at that. I am not. So in person conversation, the thing that makes a person a right client is they heard something, or they feel a restriction or lack of freedom or lack of contentment in their life, or they feel they don't know who they are and they want to know, because not everybody wants to know, in my experience. Otherwise I'd be very busy. and and then they come to me and I feel that, like, I can get their commitment, and that's the right client for me. And I can just do what I do well, right? Like, it's a match. It's like in relationships or in everything. So that's what I think is the most important, like a real commitment, and to what I'm saying I do, rather than like something that they have an impression that is not maybe true.
Yeah, I've heard it said too that, the coach chooses the client just as much as the client chooses the coach, and
Yeah.
then when that happens, there's a synergy there that allows, the client to grow, but also enhances the life of the coach.
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely adore my clients because they're also people who use my gifts directly. That's such a special bond. Like, I was born with gifts. I learned things that I can pass on, and they're allowing me to be in a flow of life by having received something and now being able to give it forward or pay it forward. It's amazing. It just I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it.
Oh, great. Well, Maria, I'm so grateful for our time together. As we come to a close, there are 3 questions I usually ask of all of my guests. So, are you ready for the core 3 as I call
Or
them? All right. The first is, please share a book or a podcast that has had a significant impact on you.
I love the book, Hadrian's Memoirs by Margaret Yourcenar. So the most fascinating thing about that book to me is that the author tried to replicate the life of Hadrian, of the emperor. She tried to experience things that he experienced, travel the places he traveled. It's been a long time since I read it, but that's something that will always blow my mind, that that she did so much research. It took so many years to try and understand what the life looked like through the eyes of this emperor, and then write a book about his life as he was facing death and the wisdom of that. It's just probably one of my favorite books.
Wow,
Yeah.
cool. I've never heard of that one before. What's one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
Hmm. I really didn't come with an expectation at all. So
It's quite all right.
yeah, no, yeah, I just came to this to just have a conversation and share, and what I will say is that I do appreciate that you do the podcast and that you do ask coaches to share who they are and what they do, because I think that increases the chances of people finding the right coach, and that I appreciate. And now that you gave me the chance, there you go, I said it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that as well. And as we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that's going to help them change their tomorrow?
Commit yourself to asking small, medium, or big asks. Make like 5 asks a day, 5 requests, 5 questions, get curious. 5 asks a day. That's something that is just present for me. It happened out of one of the last sessions that I led. Um, we started a little group of asking, and it got me really present to how little some people ask, how much we are just so mindful of one another that we try to not impose, and we don't ask, and when we don't ask, we're not in the flow of receiving and giving, and so it gets very complicated. But I will just leave it at that, like, make 5 asks a day of people in your life and see what happens.
Oh, I love it. Well, how can people find you and reach out to you?
The best way to find me is through my website, mariaparente.com. It's spelled with a J, Maria. And I think through your website as well. So that's another way. And then email maria@mariaparente.com.
Okay,
So
perfect. Well, Maria, thank you again for the gift of your time. This has been an amazing conversation. I so appreciate you, and I appreciate Jocelyn for connecting us as well. I look forward to having you back on the podcast again when
awesome.
you would like.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to come again.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me, and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, check out my website, personalcoachfinder.com, and find someone who can help. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps today and make your life awesome, friends.